Welcome to another instalment of the Carp Fix session film, but this time with a little twist. You're joining me at Embryo Angling's Baston Serpentine Lake. Now, the fish only go to 35 pounds here. It's a relatively new syndicate, and because of that, nobody is here. And it's the perfect place for me to test something that I've been wanting to try for a very long time. Now, if you watch these videos regularly, you will know that I'm not someone who likes to change their rigs or components very often. In fact, hardly ever. And the reason for that is I build confidence in what I use, and then I can trust it wherever I go. Now, if you are ever gonna try something new, then I'd like to do it when the stakes aren't that high. Now, Korda a little while ago, they brought out the Longshanked Beaked point hook. Now, I've looked at it lots and lots of times. I really like the style and the pattern of it, but like I say, very, very difficult for me to incorporate it into my big carp fishing, having never used it before. But the main reason for wanting to make the change is longer shank hooks turn more aggressively. Now, they're mechanically more sound, but long shanked hooks, in my mind previously, they sort of go hand in hand with more hook pulls. Now, that's my opinion, or sort of the feeling I've had about them in the past. However, now that they've done the beaked point version, I'm wondering whether they will stay in that little bit better. Now, I want to use them big, and when I say big, I mean a size 2, which is a huge hook. But my thinking is, if I can catch a few fish here, it's barbless only, it's pretty weedy. If they work with the small carp that are in this lake, then they'll certainly work well with bigger carp in the future. And I think it's the perfect place to try it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the combi multi-rig pretty much as I normally would. I'll have to tweak the braided section to allow for the bigger hook and for a sort of longer, sort of supple piece, but the rest of my components will stay the same, and that way I'll be able to gauge whether or not it's working for me. But I think it's going to work. I've tied these rigs up at home previously. They look right, but like I say, it's very hard for me to try something new when the stakes are high. Here, you know, there's nothing in here like ridiculously big at the moment. I think, like I say, the largest fish is 35 pound, good head of 20s. And if this rig and that size hook works here, then I'm sure it will work with bigger ones. So on arrival to Serpentine Lake, there was nobody here. Obviously walked up onto, which is a very obvious main point. I actually fished here once for a charity event just on the weekend that the lake opened, and great view here. You can see both ends of the lake. You've got a bay round to the left, big bowl of open water out in front. Actually saw a couple of fish show in the main bowl out in front, and saw one round to the right in front of swim number 3. So yeah, I think we'll start on the point. Oh, sir. Should have given that cup a rinse first. That's going to be mouldy. For this version of the combi multi-rig, I'm going to talk you through the slight tweaks that I make and how to tie it. So the first thing that I do is take 8 to 9 inches of the slip D braid and cut that off. I then fold it in half and place it on top of my rig board. From there, I take the 25 pound boom, I take a palm's width, which is roughly 4 inches, and again fold that in half. Now I make a small loop with the boom, and I pass the small loop of slip D braid through that loop and place it against my rig safe. Now normally with the size 6 wide gape, I start at 2.5 centimetres, knowing that by the time the knot is tied, it ends up being 3.5. But to allow for the extra length of the shank on the Longshanked Beaked point size 2, I'm going to start at 3.5, knowing that once I've done my 4-turn Albright knot, I will end up with a 4.5 centimetre braided loop. Both tag ends need to exit the mono loop in the same direction as the loop, so all braid coming out of the same side of the 25 pound boom loop. Once I've got that through there, I pull that nice and tight with a puller tool, and then I trim the tags not too tight. I like a roughly 4 to 5 mil tag on both the braided lengths and also on the 25-pound boom. From that point, I take a small piece of 0.7 mil silicone. I put that onto a splicing needle, onto the braided loop, and then push that over the knot so it's nicely, neatly finished. From there, I take an anti-tangle sleeve. I trim down the fatter end of that by 5 or 6 mil, and I thread that onto the 25-pound boom from the opposite end to the braided loop, thin end first. I then put a small 0.6 mil crimp on. I then thread it through the quick change hybrid leg clip. That then goes back through the other side of the double barreled crimp, and I measure that against my rig safe so the boom from the swivel to the Albright knot is exactly 5 inches, and I crimp it in the large groove on the pliers, not the small. I know that's a bit back to front, but I found the larger compartment on the crimping pliers gives a much neater finish on the small crimps. Tends to work for me, and I know it does for Dan at Korda also. At that point, it's just a simple case of pushing the anti-tangle sleeve onto the quick change hybrid leg clip and giving it a little stretch with the puller tool. At that point, it's ready for the kicker. I thread the kicker on again using a splicing needle, and then you're going to go through the front of the eye of the hook, and then you're going to pass the eye of the hook inside of the kicker. You know, it's quite tight, these little kickers that I've got, but I force that onto the eye of the kicker, and then it's a simple case of putting the bait onto the D and forcing it round onto the hook. It's really important where your D finishes, because I want the hook to be able to drop when the fish picks up the hook bait. So the D, the bottom of the loop, should be halfway between the point and where the barb would be on a barbed hook. Now, at that point, I tested it on my palm a few times. It looked really good, but however, when I've tested the bait in the edge, the buoyancy of the bait is making it want to travel up to the eye of the hook, and I found that's not what I'm trying to achieve. When the hook ends up by the eye of the hook, the hook lifts up from the eye and the point doesn't drop. So to counteract that, I've now put another piece of the 0.7 mil silicone onto the hook point, round onto the shank. I then squeeze it, put the splicer needle between the shank of the hook, so I can get the splicer needle inside the silicone. I then drag the D through there, put the bait on as normal, pass it over the hook point as normal, and then drag it back up so that the braided loop is again halfway between the point and where the barb would be. Now that means that when the fish picks it up, the hook will always drop and it won't try to travel to the eye. Obviously I'm testing this, and we're going to see how we get on. I might find out later in the session that it's better to use shrink tube. I'm looking at it thinking, by the time I flapped around with a little bit of silicone, it might be a bit better with shrink tube, but we'll see how we get on. Okay then, I've had a little led around right in the middle of this main bowl. You know, I've not seen much jump, but there's been the odd one out there, and generally the middle's a great place to start. You're never far wrong. It's quite a small spot, but on the right hand side it's pretty gravelly and I can hit it pretty easily, and on the left hand side it's not as firm, it's not as big, but I can get it to bang down, I can get it to slide, so I probably can just about squeeze 2 on it. Now, for that sort of presentation, you know, a combi multi-rig, you need clean bottom, whether that be silt, whether that be gravel, whether it be clay or sand. It's no good snarled up in the weeds. So really important, be meticulous with the leading rod, feeling the bottom, adjusting your clip until every single time at the same angle you know you're on it. Now I've just been around the distance sticks, and it's 16 wraps and 6 inches. You know, 6 inches might not matter, but it might. But yeah, it's going to be tight, 2 nicely together, a few spombs of bait, and I think we'll catch something out there. Right then, the 2 combi rigs are sat there looking very nice and ready to go. I've just baited up. I've put out 30 spoms. It's a mixture of boilie, pellet and boilie crumb. So I've gone 2 parts boilie, 2 parts pellet, 1 part crumb, a little bit of smart liquid, a little bit of salmon oil, mixed it around, and I actually added a tiny little bit of water at the end just to make it all stick down into the nose of the spom. It's gone out there lovely. And I'm pretty happy, you know, I'm pretty happy. Centre of the pond, always a good starting point. And it's just time to see whether these rigs are going to do the do.